to a special edition of eYe on Education. I recently had the opportunity to chat with two Nashua High School seniors who have excelled here in the Nashua School District. First up is Grace Landry. Grace is a wonderful artist who recently showed her work on the walls of Nashua South High School. Let's check it out. Hi, we're back and I'm with Grace Landry and we're looking at her wonderful work here in the corridors of the main office at Nashua High School South. Welcome, Grace.
Thanks.
So tell me a little bit about your exhibit and the pieces maybe you've chosen here today.
So when I chose these pieces, they're from my ELO and then also from me as growing up as an artist. So from freshman year, some of them are sophomore, I think is the youngest one, all the way up through senior year, and some of them are recent as a few weeks ago. And so when I chose them, I was looking at including my growth along with my strongest pieces. So some of the pieces are a lot stronger, but I included the weaker pieces to show where I've come from and how I became the artist I am. So I have a few different series of work. So behind me is the monotype series, and then I have my drawing, and then also painting and a collage piece. So I have a few different things to show where those processes have brought me and just my different exploration. So it's kind of showcasing all the different areas I've worked in as an artist.
What's your favorite medium?
I really like working, my newest style has been working with permanent marker, watercolor, and acrylic, working multimedia. I did a lot of work in monotype last year. That was my favorite when I was doing AP studio art. But now I really have been learning to love architecture, and doing the watercolor and Sharpie has been showcasing the architecture and the lines a lot better. So that's what I've been loving lately.
What are these pieces behind you?
So these are all monotypes, and they are made from inking a plate 8x10, and then you completely make it solid black, and then you use different materials such as paper towels, Q-tips, pencils, all different things to wipe away the ink, which leaves the inverted image when you print it. So you take away, and wherever you want the paper to be white, that's where you remove the ink, and then that creates the image. So.
These are amazing. I wish you could see this in person at home, and if you'd like to, come down to Nashua South. It's just beautiful. I love these images. So talk about your year here at Nashua High School South in preparing for this exhibit.
So this year I've done a lot of self-exploration of myself as an artist, because I completed AP Studio Art last year, which was the final art class they offered in drawing and 2D art basically. So I wanted to figure out who I am as an artist. So this year, to prepare for this exhibit, I worked on a lot of different styles, but that was to kind of figure out what I like best, and that's how I discovered I love architecture, is because I went through the process of drawing still life with China marker and on different collages, which I enjoyed, but I kind of got bored of that, and I started doing architecture in those pieces. So then I found painting as a way to include the architecture, but with a medium I liked more. So a lot of that this year was just kind of exploring what I like, and then the pieces that I like the best definitely came out. They're my strongest pieces because it reflects my love for the work. So that's kind of what I did, was just discovering what I want to do.
How many hours a day do you make art?
So I would say painting, drawing wise, I would do an hour and a half in class, then sometimes a half an hour outside. But then also art for me is beyond just drawing, because I do Irish dance, which reflects in these pieces. That's my inspiration. So art wise, Irish dance, I do another 2 hours a day, which is art, but it's just a different outside the classroom.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I always like to ask about inspiration, so here we go. What inspires you?
So definitely for me, these pieces were inspired by dance. They're all kind of inspired by my experiences, but I would say dance and movement has really inspired my work, and the bright colors, and so all my pieces, the different styles have been influenced differently. So these ones were influenced by trying to capture dance, movement, anatomy of like a dancer. That's what inspired this series. But then my drawing series was inspired by like still life, and I was looking at a lot of artists who did China marker, just a wide variety because it's a very different medium. And then my painting pieces were inspired by just, I love houses and architecture, so that's really what drove those pieces. So I looked at a lot of different artists that study architecture in different ways with different mediums, and that all work together, and like my love for bright colors is reflected in those pieces, which isn't captured in my monotype. So yeah,
I love the movement in all of the work here. Other than you have a strong passion for this, obviously. Do you have a location you go to, or a special place in your home, or where do you like to work?
Honestly, I love just anywhere I can go. I do love the classroom because something about being at school and having the community of artists around you in the room, like I can thrive off the feedback and the like helpful criticism in a sense. It really drives me to be a better artist. But at the same tone, like when I'm in the car, and obviously when I'm not driving, but when I'm driving going in the car to competitions, I usually have like 4-hour rides. And a lot of times, because I'm just sitting there and time's passing, I think of my most creative thoughts. And that's how I kind of came up with my style of the architecture with the Sharpie, because I started drawing with Sharpie in the car, and that's why I was like, I really want to incorporate this into my work. So kind of being bored and sitting somewhere, it really just inspires me because it makes me think of something that I wouldn't normally think of when I'm busy and just going along with the day.
Very cool, very cool. Let's talk about the Nashua school system and the art program, because you've come 12 years
Yes.
in art here. Tell me a little bit about that and how you've grown, and what teachers have really made a difference to you.
So I started having an interest in art all the way back first grade. Immediately once I had art, we had it 1 day a week in elementary school, and I loved it. And I actually had a piece submitted into the art show we had here this year, but when I was in first grade. And every year I'd have a piece submitted, and I just loved it. And so I stayed involved in those classes, and I always looked forward to when I got to middle school to be a part of the Artist Society, which is similar to the Art Honor Society we have here, but it was more about making art, and Mrs. Moran ran that club. And that was awesome for me because I got to, when I was in 6th grade, I got to be with the 8th graders who were amazing artists in my eyes back then, and they would show me like their work, and I kind of would always try and be like them. So then when I got to 8th grade, I was able to take the Intro to Art, which I believe is Art 1 offered here at the high school as an 8th grader. So that helped me get more experience, and it was a more challenging class, and that's where I was like, I really like art. And I realized that was like my thing. So then when I got to high school, I had Miss Durden, who I loved as a teacher. She pushed me to new limits because I learned to work with acrylic. I learned to work with a lot of different materials we didn't have at the middle school. And so that gave me a lot of opportunities. And then once I realized all the opportunities the high school had, I wanted to take Art 2, Advanced Art, and then I eventually took AP Studio Art. And I loved all the classes. Miss Peringer has been a huge inspiration to me as an artist because she has taught me so many things about how to like grow as an artist and when you're stuck and how to like work through that, because that's something with my ELO I hadn't mentioned before, is there were times when I was stuck on a piece, like one of my pieces in the drawing, I actually wanted to just tear it up. I was over it, I was done with it, but she was like, no, save it. So I did end up tearing it up, and I laid it back down in a way that I thought was going to work, and it actually turned out to be one of my favorite pieces, but it was made from something that didn't work, and so she's taught me how to really think creatively and differently about something and not always just replicating an image. And so that's something I've learned as an artist through the high school. Definitely has helped me grow that art isn't just copying an image and making a painting look just like the picture, but really expressing yourself through your work. And so that's something that's really inspired me through the Nashua schools, is that Miss Peringer has really taught us well, is that what art is, and like it has to have meaning to you. And so I've loved being a part of like the art at Nashua South. It's been great.
I'd say hats off to all the art teachers in the Nashua School District. I think that's fantastic. Let's talk about where we go from here.
So I'm going to Drexel University for product design, which is going to be able to incorporate my love for art, but also beyond this, I love engineering. I've taken some engineering courses through the program here at South as well, and I took calculus and math and all my math and physics classes, and I love them. But again, that's very different from art, and so I wanted to find a way to incorporate both of those because they're very different. A lot of fields don't allow you to work both of those into one major, but product design gives you that ability to have that math side of your brain and the physics and the engineering, but also the artistic side working together. So hopefully I'll be able to continue as an artist and be able to still remain creative, but also be successful with an engineering side and aspect. So,
Well, I'll look forward to seeing what happens and where you go from here.
Thanks.
And thank you, Grace, for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
And your work is beautiful all around. I hope you at home can maybe get a chance to enjoy some of it. And you can see it here during the show. And thanks again for joining us today. This is Doug Beals on location at Nashua High School South. Back to the studio. Thank you, Grace. Pretty amazing work. Next is Mary Zhu. She will explain her independent research project with us. Well, welcome everyone. I'm here today with Mary Zhu, and we're here to talk about her independent research project. Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Nice to see you again.
It's nice to see you as well.
So tell me a little bit give me a brief overview of your project.
So basically, I used a combination of math, computer science, and economics to create a computational model that projects the environmental and economic trade-offs or impacts among different carbon tax policy scenarios. So for this particular project, I analyzed 3 carbon tax policy scenarios. The first scenario is if the entire world adopts a carbon tax. The second is if only major developed countries adopt a carbon tax. And the third is if no country in the world adopts a carbon tax.
Where do we stand on that right now?
So right now, given the current political climate, the United States recently withdrew from the Paris Agreement, given President Donald Trump's decision. So it looks like right now, the U.S. isn't very close to implementing an environmental policy like a carbon tax, but this research is very useful because in 2015, while the Paris Agreement was actually being negotiated, presidential candidate Bernie Sanders proposed the Climate Protection and Justice Act, or the CPJA, which I call it in my project. And this was a very rigorous carbon tax that Bernie Sanders had in mind for the United States. And it was considered in the Senate for some while. So that's why this particular project focuses on that carbon tax. Although this model is flexible enough to project the impacts of any carbon tax on the United States and the world.
That's fascinating. How about if we talk a little bit about the science of all this?
All right.
Let's come on over to your beautiful poster board here
Right.
and display. Let's see what we've got.
So basically, I used a mathematical modeling technique called linear programming. And linear programming is basically maximizes an objective function, which in this case is social welfare. So this particular model is based on a theory by Nobel economist Paul Samuelson. It's called spatial price equilibrium theory, which basically implies that an equilibrium is reached when all countries and commodities are maximized across, when social welfare is maximized across all countries and commodities. So this particular model covers 17 countries and regions and 11 major agricultural commodities, which I listed in this part of my poster. And then the rest of these equations are all the constraints and footprints that my project analyzes. And so, for example, this economic constraint implies that domestic consumption and exports should equal domestic supply and imports. So it basically just shows that there's an equilibrium that is reached. While this particular equation reflects the total carbon emitted, the total blue water used, the total food wastage generated, and the total land occupied in the production and consumption of the agricultural commodities. So, but a very interesting part of this model is that it's validated with historical data from 1992 to 2012. And the model shows that the world consumption and production data is up to 83% accurate, which is a very accurate measure given this projection model. While the individual country data is a little bit more prone to error due to decreased stability or predictability for single countries. So like I was also pretty surprised. Like when you think of carbon emissions, you usually think of like the energy industry, such as like cars or like manufacturing. But I was actually really surprised to find out that agriculture accounts for up to 1/3 of the world's carbon emissions. So that's why I decided to focus mainly on the agricultural industry. But the flexibility of this model allows for you to expand this particular model to across different industries, such as if I wanted to go beyond agriculture into perhaps something such as like the energy industry. This could easily be used for something like that. So.
What does this result up here refer to?
So
these ones are right up here.
So for this model, my model was able to generate a lot of results. So it looked at the consumption, it looked at the impacts of carbon taxes on consumption, production, exports, imports, prices, and on environmental considerations such as carbon emissions and blue water usage. But since there is very limited space on this poster board, I decided to focus only on the beef market because you might know that beef is one of the most carbon-intensive agricultural goods. So therefore, it would be most heavily impacted by a carbon tax. So my results showed that if only developed countries adopt a carbon tax, then they will suffer economically, while developing countries will actually suffer environmentally. So if we look at this, for example, the United States, which is a developed country, experiences a decrease in economic productivity due to decreased production and trade and increase in prices. While Brazil, which is a developing country, actually experiences a little bit of economic benefit from a decrease in imports. However, developing countries like Brazil experience something called carbon leakage. And carbon leakage is when energy-intensive companies from heavily regulated areas relocate to less regulated areas and emit even more carbon emissions there. So that's pretty bad for the environment, while also being pretty bad for the economy for developed countries. But if all countries of the world adopt a carbon tax, then all countries will suffer economically from decreased trade and production, but the world will benefit significantly environmentally. So if you look here, if only developed countries adopt a carbon tax, only 5.5 tons of carbon emissions will be reduced, while if the entire world adopts a carbon tax, 15.5 billion tons of carbon will be reduced. So there's a pretty significant difference that we have to consider. But the results also show that something interesting that happens is that price increases actually outweigh production decreases. So this means that the higher costs are mainly passed down to the consumer. So if you think about this intuitively, no matter how much you increase the price of food, you can only decrease your consumption of it by so much, because food is a necessity. You need to eat it to survive. So that's why consumers are mostly harmed when carbon taxes are implemented across all countries. But I guess the results show that in order for the world to effectively reduce the shared negative externality of carbon emissions, the world must be willing to cooperate, as it shows in the results here. So.
What do you say to, as we roll back to the table here, what do you say to those people who say that it's not affecting the environment as much, and that we probably shouldn't be as concerned about that?
Yeah, there's definitely a segment of the population that still believes that like climate change is a myth, and that that we should be looking at the economic costs of implementing carbon taxes or other forms of environmental policy. But I think in this situation, we have to really look at the science and how there are a lot of other, although my particular study doesn't really look into the causes and effects of climate change itself, there's a lot of previous literature and other research that shows that climate change is happening, and that in order for the world to effectively reduce it together, we have to turn to international policy, such as and looking at implementing different types of carbon combating policies, such as carbon taxes. And carbon taxes aren't the only type of environmental policy that could work. We could also look at other alternatives, such as cap and trade schemes and other types of carbon policies. Yes.
What other countries are really in support of this? Do you know?
So there are actually many countries in the world that have already implemented carbon taxes. So I know for a fact that Australia once implemented a carbon tax. I know that the UK, I think, also has some sort of carbon policy. And some big companies in the United States are also rallying up carbon taxes. So surprisingly, ExxonMobil, which is one of the world's biggest oil companies, actually supports carbon taxes. And the former CEO, Rex Tillerson, he's the Secretary of State now, I think.
Yes.
But he once gave a speech advocating carbon taxes. So I think, although there's a lot of backlash against climate change policy, especially given the current administration in the United States, there's also a big segment of the population that supports climate change policy.
Well, that's good. Let's talk about why this project, how you came up with this.
So I've always been very interested in economics. I was actually fortunate enough to take AP Macro and Microeconomics in 9th grade with Mr. Claffey here at Nashua High School South. So ever since then, I've just been really interested in it, and I started conducting research with an economics professor from Northeastern University in 10th grade. And since then, I've been doing research with him, and this is actually my third project. So what specifically inspired me to begin this project was the recent presidential election. So in New Hampshire, politics is basically the state sport. So it's talked up a lot, and there are candidates constantly flocking to our state. So I was pretty interested in getting to know each of the candidates and their specific policy proposals. And one of the proposals that caught my attention was Bernie Sanders' carbon tax policy proposal. So I was really interested in not only the environmental impacts of his proposal, but also the economics behind it and why there was such a big controversy behind it in general. So I guess my curiosity with the economics and the environmental impacts behind that, and also my interest in math, political science, computer science, it all kind of resulted in this project. So.
What do you think, politic-wise, do you see in the future we will move in this direction regardless of the current political climate?
So I think climate change policy will always be on the national radar, and it will always be on the national agenda. So even when our current president's term ends, climate change will still be talked about and discussed and debated, not only in the United States, but across the world. Because I think there are very few countries who haven't entered the Paris Agreement, and the rest of the 200-something countries in the world have entered it, and they're all actively combating climate change right now. So regardless of what the United States recently decided, I think talk about carbon taxes, talk about other types of climate change policy, it will always be going on. And research, quantitative research into this sort of debate is very important, because a lot of social policy questions have recently been discussed with a lot of bias behind it, or with a lot of personal opinions thrown in there. But my particular project focuses on just the objective quantitative impacts, the economic impacts. So I think this sort of research will be pretty important in the future, and I hope to continue doing this as I head off to college next year and beyond that.
Now, you've won an award. Let's talk a little bit about that. Tell me what you won and where you've been. And
So this project was actually chosen as one of the top 40 finalist projects for the 2017 Regeneron Science Talent Search. So the school received a $2,000 grant for all STEM departments, and I received $25,000 as a prize for being chosen.
Excellent.
And I was flown to DC for a week to present my project at the National Geographic Society to policy experts and to the public. And I was also given the opportunity to visit my two U.S. senators, Jean Sheehy and Maggie Hassan, in Capitol Hill, and to discuss my work with them as well. So it was a great opportunity, I think, to connect with fellow scientists across the country and with other high school students who are also very interested in these sorts of things and in combating future problems that they see in the world and in the United States.
how many people did you present to?
So there are multiple judges that I had to present to. I'd say around 10 to 15 judges. And then there was a public day where people from the public just got to come in and see all the finalist projects. So that day, I think I lost my voice from talking to so many people. There were people of all ages. There were alumni of the Society for Science in the Public, which is the organization that runs the competition. And then there were also elementary school kids, middle school kids, and also high school students who were very interested in learning more about research that other high school students did. So it was a very excitement-filled day.
So you met some students that were doing similar things like you.
Yes.
And also, you probably got to network too with some adults.
Yes.
And colleges there, or pretty much?
There weren't so many colleges there, I guess. It was mostly just scientists from different fields who wanted to see what the younger generation was doing in those specific areas. And also just, there were a lot of family members there as well. So
What did our senators have to say?
Our senators were very interested in my project. So Maggie Hassan and Jean Shaheen are very pro-climate policy. So they saw this as a very useful tool for measuring the impacts of different climate change policies that they've either advocated for before or are considering now. So
That's wonderful. So where do we go from here? Where are you going in the fall? You're finishing your senior year here at Nashua High School South.
Yes.
Where are you going?
So I was admitted to Stanford University, and I'm going to be studying economics there. Although I'm not really sure yet what track I want to pursue, I'm considering becoming some sort of quantitative analyst for perhaps like a financial market or something in the future. So I know that I definitely want to look into interdisciplinary studies, and I want to continue combining my interest in math and computer science and economics in the future, and also still be involved in political discussions as they come. So
that is fantastic. Now, all the research you've done, where is it going to go? Are you going to send it to someone, give it to someone, or what is your plan for that?
So this particular project, since it was a computer program that I created, I submitted it for a patent recently. So currently it's still in pending patent status, but I hope to move forward with that. And I also plan to submit my work, my research paper to some sort of environmental economics journal. So hopefully it will be published in the future, and for other scientists to be able to use as background research into further projects that they'll want to pursue in this area.
Right. Did you contact Bernie Sanders about this?
I didn't contact him directly, but I think this might be something he would be interested in learning about.
I think he'd definitely be interested in this. Well, I congratulate you and wish you well on your graduation and your future college life. It'll be wonderful. Look forward to keeping up with that.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. And thank everyone for joining me here on a special edition of Eye on Education. I'm Doug Beals, and we'll see you next time.